Good evening, everyone. I'm Indu Saxena from the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers. It is my privilege and great pleasure to welcome you all today at the CIPR's second annual conference titled Alliance and Partnership in the Indo-Pacific, Elevating Strategies and Interests. This is the second day of our conference, and it's the fourth panel focused on the regional perspectives. Frankly speaking, when we started preparing for the event, we were just counting the victims and the sufferings of the Russia-Ukraine war. Surprisingly and shockingly, a new conflict erupted in the Middle East and further divided the already fragmented world. As we all know, the brutal impact of these conflicts is not limited to the one region, but it's impacting the Indo-Pacific countries too. And in these days, we will discuss and analyze the future of the Indo-Pacific. And this panel is particularly focused on the growing importance of the Pacific Islands. I would like to mention that this conference, we have the knowledge partners. This time we started partnering with our seminars and conferences. So our knowledge partners for this conference are Wisconsin Veteran Museum, Wisconsin Madison, American International University, Bangladesh, and Amity International Institute of International Studies, Amity University, India. And we are very pleased to have the knowledge partners for this conference, and looking at the response of the registered and from the partners, we are just looking to collaborate with the more partners in the future. So we are delighted to kick off this panel with my colleague, Chris Kolakowski. And before handing over to him, I would like to announce that the views presented here are personal, should not be construed to any affiliation and organizations. Thank you. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Indu, and good evening, everybody. I guess it's evening here in Wisconsin, but I know we've got a panelist joining us from Australia where it's the next morning, the next day. But it's a very important discussion, and I welcome all our viewers. Very important discussion. Often in the Indo-Pacific, we talk about Southeast Asia, we talk about the island chains, but we should never forget that for centuries, there has been a chess game among the Pacific Islands that stretch out in the vastness between what we know as the first island chain all the way over to the west coast of the United States. And so it's important to remember that what goes on there, as history has taught us, can often have great repercussions all across the Pacific. And so we've got a great panel today to explore some of the things that are going on, some of the dynamics of the region, and explore some of the U.S. alliances and partnerships to align with the theme of the conference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our great panelists. We're going to hear them with remarks, and then afterwards open it up for some questions. And then I'm going to use moderator's prerogative. I have a couple of questions myself teed up as well. So our first panelist, our first speaker is Major General Paul Knapp, who is the Adjutant General of Wisconsin and the Commander of the Wisconsin National Guard, a position he's held since March of 2020. He is a 1992 graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, has flown in combat and flown in support of many Air Force missions over the last 20 years, way too numerous to name. I won't, for fear of leaving any of them out. He's a recipient of the Legion of Merit, the Distinguished Flying Cross 3 times, 4 Meritorious Service Medals, and 6 Air Medals. And today, one of the things he's going to be talking about is the partnership between the state of Wisconsin and Papua New Guinea, among several other initiatives that he's been working in the area and his perspectives. The other gentleman that is joining us is Ambassador Satyendra Prasad, who's the climate lead for ABT Associates in Australia, and he's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He's the former Fijian ambassador to the United Nations, the US, and Canada, and has previously been a governance specialist for the World Bank and the UK's FCDO. As ambassador to the UN, he also served as chair for the Pacific Islands Developing States. So these are two outstanding panelists to discuss these issues. We'll start with General Knapp, and then we'll proceed with Ambassador Prasad, and then proceed to the discussion. So General Knapp, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for the introduction, and appreciate you inviting me all here tonight. I also appreciate you not going into any more depth on the bio. That was quite enough. So, but thank you. So, why is the Wisconsin National Guard involved in the Pacific? I'm going to start with a little bit more history, which I know Chris appreciates. And that's of the SPP program, or the State Partnership Program. So the State Partnership Program was established in 1991, largely to partner the former Soviet bloc countries with states in the United States to assist in transitioning them to independent countries and helping with their military training. So a lot has happened since then with those initial countries, but it's gone to now having 100 partner nations around the world. And it's not just developing countries. More recently, we've had some major countries that definitely are not developing requesting state partnerships. And so it's been heightened by the events we mentioned in Europe and particularly Ukraine. And the State Partnership Program in Ukraine really with their partnership with California really highlights some of the significance that these partnerships can create over the years. So many of these countries, we have a military presence, but with the active duty military, military members come and go, they're routinely restationed, but with National Guard, we can create enduring and long-standing partnerships, which is really what we want around the globe. And for the Pacific, and specifically Wisconsin and Papua New Guinea, we are really lucky to be paired with Papua New Guinea. And I'm sure you're asking, well, how was Wisconsin, northern tier state in the United States, paired with largely tropical country of Papua New Guinea? Well, historically, we have a long history with Papua New Guinea, originating in World War II, where the 32nd Infantry Division, which was made up of Wisconsin and Michigan National Guard soldiers, actually started in Australia and crossed the water to Papua New Guinea and assisted with liberating Papua New Guinea from the occupying Japanese army on the northern shore. Great history, a lot of great literature out there. I'm not going to go into all the details for tonight's discussion, but I just want to tee that up. And so really, when I was privileged to go to sign the partnership agreement in Papua New Guinea early this year, we really remarked on the renewing of our relationship after more than 50 years of its beginning back in World War II. So that has been outstanding. So Papua New Guinea, where it's located, is just outside of what's considered the second island chain. Chris mentioned the first island chain. There's also a second island chain, a little harder, less defined than the first island chain. But what it really does for Papua New Guinea, it's a very strategic place in the Pacific for both for all of the countries in the area, as well as for the United States, which our goal is a free and open Pacific. And that is one of the main things, the initiatives of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, supported by the rest of the United States government in maintaining the global commons and a free and open Pacific in that region. The one thing that not a lot of people realize is what we many times refer to as the tyranny of distance in the Pacific. It's one of the things that we are really becoming familiar with in Wisconsin. When you just try and say, hey, I'm going to go to Papua New Guinea. Well, it's not quite as easy as that. There's a lot of travel, and usually it's close to 36 hours, best case scenario, if I were to travel commercially to Papua New Guinea through either Australia or Korea, Singapore. There's a lot of different ways to get there, potentially through from Hawaii through Guam is another way. But there's a lot of ways to get there, but none of it is fast. And so that is one of the things that really has become evident in our travels back and forth between Papua New Guinea and the state of Wisconsin. So a couple other things I wanted to mention here in my opening remarks, and I don't want to go too long, are some of the priorities for the region. So in terms of our priorities for the Indo-Pacific region, I already mentioned free and open, right? We want to have a free and open Pacific. We want the people of the Pacific to be connected to each other and connected to the rest of the world across the global commons. We are promoting prosperity in the region, trying to help the countries there advance and to create a great environment for their people, to be secure, which obviously is one of the questions that we're looking at more in depth this evening, is security in the area with our pacing challenge of the United States being China and the elephant in the room of the Pacific, if you will. And the last one is to be resilient. And getting to resiliency, that tends to come up quite a bit. And I think it's one of the biggest threats to the Indo-Pacific region is climate change and global warming. Most of the countries that we're talking about are very close to, where large amounts of their population are living very close to sea level. So very small fluctuations in the sea level can have a large impact on their countries. And so that is one of the things that the United States is very concerned about in the Pacific. If you look at the emissions of China being more than double of the emissions of the United States on any given year, we really want to promote moderating climate change in the area because it is a huge threat to the Indo-Pacific region. With that, I think I'm going to end my opening remarks just by saying that partners and allies are critical. And the United States, the State Partnership Program, the National Guard, we really rely on partners and relationships around the world. We don't attach strings to our partnerships like our primary competitors do, and we promote the ideals that I mentioned just a couple moments ago. So thanks, Chris. I'll end my opening remarks there and look forward to questions.
Thank you, General. Before the ambassador goes, your tyranny of distance, as you called it, the consortium's podcast did a episode on Pacific geography back a few months ago. It's called Vanguard Indo-Pacific is the podcast, and it's the tyranny of geography, looking at Pacific geography, because it's a vastness in the world very unlike most other places, that's for sure.
It really is, and I would love to get that link at some point. I'd love to watch that.
I'll send it to you.
Awesome.
Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chris, Indu, and Major General. Great to meet you, and thank you for those that oversight. Oops. And you hear me, right?
Yeah.
And for that oversight, but you also gave me a few very helpful opening remarks. And so let me begin with the tyranny of distance. And I always say to my American friends, yes, distance does matter, and it should not lead to a strain of relations, but we are always excited when you do make it to the center of the planet. And if there is a center of the planet, it's probably in Kiribati, a country in the middle of the Pacific, 4.3 million square miles of the ocean. And it is the only country with all the four poles, north, east, west, and south. So wow. It is the center of the world. If there is a center of the world, that is probably it. So it's a tyranny of distance the other way. You are so far from the center. And that is how we like to speak about it. But Major General also spoke about PNG, and I think part of what I wanted to bring into this fantastic panel that you have put together is to give some Pacific perspective into this. And I just wanted to give a sense of what Papua New Guinea is. it is a small network of islands north of Australia, and straddles Asia and the Pacific beautifully. It's got something like 920 of the world's languages exist in Papua New Guinea, and try to get your mind around that fact that it is such a diverse country. Something like 16% of the world's languages exist in this one country alone, and on its nature side, it hosts 6 to 7% of the world's land-based, not the marine-based, land-based biodiversity is in Papua New Guinea, and that is how important it is to the rest of the world in the oxygen that it provides to the planet, the environmental services that country provides to all humanity. And 40% of world's tuna spawns in the waters on the northern side of Papua New Guinea. And so it is quite central to our global food system, not only to the Pacific's food system, but to every child's school sandwich of tuna and bread. Probably 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 probably is sourced to Papua New Guinea. So it is far too important in and of itself to Papua New Guineans, to the Pacific, but to the planet as a whole. And I wanted to, you gave me that opportunity to say that. I might have not have picked up on that. One perspective in the sort of historical frame, there's of course some amount of unease about so much strategic overload in these small island states over the last couple of decades, if not longer. And that is to do with how the world is changing. In the post-World War II era, the global economy, if you think that the G7 represents the majority of the global economy, Germany, UK, Italy, and France, 4 of the current G7 countries are in Europe, Canada, and America, and North America, and Japan, and in Pacific. That's sort of the way in which the center of the world economy looked like for many, many decades. In 2050, what will be the G7, the 7 largest economies look like? And that will be China, probably earlier, and US, and Indonesia, and India, and Vietnam, and Bangladesh. Europe has dropped off altogether. If any one of the European economies could make it into the G7, that would be quite spectacular. But the IMF and World Bank and others kind of think in this set of countries. So the center of the world economy has moved. The center of the world economy is moving, and Asia is going to be, for next half or next century, the center of the world economy. And so with that comes all sorts of pressures on the systems, and any economy needs to move things. Any economy needs to trade, and any economy needs to be connected by air, by seas, below seas, etc., to other parts of the global trading system. This has been so historically. This will probably remain so for a long time. So all of that is playing out in this blue Pacific. But what is the Pacific? I'm also giving some sense of the Pacific. 70% of the world of our planet is ocean, and 70% of the world's ocean is Pacific. That's how large it is. You're talking about size. It is very large, and so in this, the way in which the global economy is being shaped up, this blue Pacific is going to matter in very profound ways, in ways that it may not have mattered before in earlier centuries, in the decades that I've just tried to describe to you. Much of the blue Pacific will be the source of world's protein, a good proportion of world's proteins, as land-based systems come under more climate stress. People will be looking for oceans to be providing the protein, not in the current harvesting way, but that there'll be blue foods, and foods that will be sourced from the oceans and ocean farms, and this will become where the world's foods are largely going to come from. So the Pacific matters to all economies having a stake in the future in that way. Second, that many of the minerals that the world needs are probably going to come from the seabed in future. I have my own views about that. I would love for seabed mining not to proceed because of its environmental consequences today, but at some point in future, the lithium, the minerals that the world will need will begin to come from the seabed. And so there will be competition for these resources, and there is already competition for these resources. Technology will get better, and that will be part of the consideration. And so that also features in much of the strategic discussions or behind the strategic discussions. And the third is that the services that the Blue Pacific provides, the ocean provides our essential services to humanity. Every second breath that we take comes from the ocean. And so all of us need to be invested in maintaining the health of the ocean. And this matters to Pacific Islands, first and foremost, who derive their livelihoods and identity and economy from the ocean, but it now matters to all of us in a way that it had not mattered before. And as Major General said, that the climate stress is going to be a big part of the story. And in concluding, let me make 2 or 3 remarks. There's a lot of discussion on the Pacific Islands about the China and US contestation. And fair enough, that is, these are 2 largest economies they need to in the world, 2 largest powers in the world for a significant part of the future, and they will need to adjust to each other. And they will need to be able to collaborate, and they will need to be able to cooperate. When people talk about many Pacific Islanders, one of my favorite quotes, talk about the contestation between China and US in the Pacific. And they ask us who is winning. And our answer usually is in the contest between China and US, climate change is winning. And that is a response you'll get from many leaders and civil society, etc. And to sort of conclude, as Major General said on how important climate change is going to be for the Pacific. Right now, much of the world's attention, rightly so, is on what's happening in the Middle East, and then there's another big war ongoing in Ukraine. But right now, there's another war happening in Vanuatu, and that is Vanuatu's war against the climate change. It is just beginning to recover from a cyclone, Lola, that hit the islands yesterday. It is quite buried very deep in global headlines. It has not made any global headline. Vanuatu is a small chain of countries in the Pacific. It is the 3rd cyclone that has hit Vanuatu within this financial year. The 3 cyclones put together have wiped off some 40% of Vanuatu's GDP, and transposing that within 1 year, transposing that onto US, that would be sort of taking something like $7 trillion off the US economy this year. Or if your salaries were $100,000 per year, wiping out $40,000 within this year and asking you to live within $60,000 that remain. And that is the scale of challenges. So it would be great that if there were sort of wise heads could prevail, and there could be strategic cooperation in the Pacific, and that it were focused on climate change. And the Pacific Islands do present a great opportunity for China and US to collaborate rather than compete, and collaborate focused on the central challenge that these islands face, which is climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The very interesting statistics and perspective from both of you. Looking at this region, it's always illuminating when you look at the region from a different lens. I'm going to exercise moderator's prerogative. I have a couple of questions. I know we've got one or two questions in the chat I will get to here in a minute. I guess you both have kind of teed up, and I want to ask two questions for either or both of you, whoever wants to take them, under the general heading of U.S. partnership and reliability. We've heard in several other panels that there are questions in parts of the Indo-Pacific, particularly the southwestern part of the Indo-Pacific, about the United States' overall reliability as a partner right now, certainly in the near term. And so, and I know, for example, President Biden having to cancel his visit to Papua New Guinea back in May certainly probably didn't help the situation. So I'm just curious, are you all picking up that in the island region, or do you have any perspective on that, or any sort of thoughts on that that you might want to share under that heading, or is that not necessarily a factor out in the islands or the Blue Pacific, to borrow the ambassador's term?
So, Chris, I'll jump in that first from my perspective, and I'd love to hear the ambassadors as well. But yes, that was a huge disappointment when the president had to cancel a visit to Papua New Guinea. As you can imagine, it's the preparation that had gone into and the excitement that PNG had in being able to host a sitting president for the first time in history was huge. And then when that event got canceled, it was also hugely disappointing. And we all were disappointed because it would have been a grand gesture at minimum, and an excellent way to strengthen our partnership with PNG. That said, we were able since then, the United States were able to sign a defense cooperation agreement with Papua New Guinea, as well as a shipwrighter agreement, which both play largely into the topics that we have discussed. The shipwrighter hopefully will help as our Coast Guard is able then to engage in Papua New Guinea and really help with maritime security and assisting with illegal and unregulated fishing, which really gets to the point that the ambassador was making about providing so much of the world's fish products will only last as long as we don't overfish the fishing grounds around the world. And so the illegal and unregulated fishing is a real problem, and we talk about it frequently with Papua New Guinea. And that shipwrighter agreement is going to be a start in the right direction. So I do definitely understand makes me a little sad to hear that our reliability is not where it should be, because we definitely want to be reliable partners.
And thanks. If I can add, and I agree with the Major General's all of the comments. I think first of all, U.S. and Pacific relations are as strong as they can be, and my own little bit of oversight of history, I don't think they've been stronger ever, and I hope that's not an exaggeration. Pacific leaders have had two back-to-back summits at the White House in the last 2 years, and I was closely involved with the first one. And this is quite spectacular. It's never happened before. But there's absolutely, in my mind, no question that U.S. is not dedicated in a joined-up way in thinking and about how to strengthen and deliver on the partnership with the Pacific Islands, and that's fantastic. Second, if I recollect correctly, just in the press conference that President Biden with the Prime Minister Albanese from Australia last week in Washington, I heard him use the term that the U.S. is a Pacific Island country. And that's a important piece of the puzzle that U.S. is very much part of this region. Hawaii is in the Pacific. That's part of American geography. American Samoa is in the Pacific. Guam is in the Pacific. There are many islands across that are within Pacific that are part of the sovereign territory of U.S. So the U.S. perspective on the Pacific has necessarily to be very different. Probably the unease, I think, on some Pacific Island countries comes from the fact that on the development side that U.S. has not been able to step up and deliver as fast as people thought it could do. And you have your own processes and the frustrations with the Congress and budgets and stuff like that. All countries have that, and I think that's those things are more issues of dialogue, and that both sides understand how different systems work. And I don't think they're fundamental. But my one quick sentence conclusion to this question is that I don't think the U.S. and Pacific relations have been as strong as they are today.
Thank you very much for that. That's actually a great segue into the second question that I'm going to ask for one or both or whoever wants to address it. Given particularly what you just said, and the United States, you're right, is still at the Pacific regardless of different factors. What are three things the United States can and should be doing to promote peace and stability in the region?
Back to you, Major General. First cut.
Yeah, you're giving me the first cut. Okay. I think I kind of touched on a couple of them, Chris, in my opening. I think assistance with security in the area is really important. And of course, being a military person as well, that probably is many times what will come to mind first for me is security. Because if we don't have a free and open and secure Pacific, all of the other things that we're trying to do in terms of trade, regulate fishing, and connect people really have to have that bedrock of security across the Pacific. So I think that's the first one. I think the second one is to continue our investment. I think our investment in the Pacific outside of the immediate spheres of our U.S. Populations. So when you talk about the Papua New Guineas and you get further to Southwest Pacific as well, there are a lot of countries that really could use and would benefit from our investment in their economies. And I'm talking both public investment, U.S. government investment, but also one of the things that we do through our partnerships is encouraging private investment as well, getting industry to these countries so that we can assist or contribute to them being able to maximize the use of the great natural resources that are abundant in the Pacific. That was two, but I think I'm going to maybe pass it back to you, Ambassador, for a lifeline.
Thanks, Major General. Can I pick up one of the lifelines from your example about ship rider agreement and try to use that as my first? I don't know how much people know about the ship rider agreement in the audience, but it essentially, if there's a U.S. Coast Guard asset in Papua New Guinea waters, what it means is that a couple of Papua New Guinea or as many Papua New Guinean naval folks can become part of that boat, and it can carry out legal activities on behalf of Papua New Guinea in the waters that Papua New Guinea manages. And that is applied so it gives security to small island states. And I described to you in an earlier statistic, Kiribati, 4.3 million square miles of the planet is Kiribati, a country of 100,000 plus people. That's a very large chunk. That's about half, 2/3 of U.S. mainland U.S. on the land, right? That's how big it is. It has one Coast Guard vessel. So how important these type of partnerships are. But this type of partnership, so if you have more frequent Coast Guard interactions with Kiribati and Papua New Guinea and so on, it gives them more eyes and ears on what is happening in their waters. And the most important thing, I think, in the short term is the prized asset that Pacific Islands have is their tuna, is their fish, right? Okay. And how do you patrol a couple of million square miles with one vessel? You simply cannot do. And if partners are providing some complementarity, it is a good thing. The tuna is impacted in two ways. One part of it is on illegal and unreported fisheries, and so they're no good guys. Everyone is sinners. There's illegal fisheries from U.S. Private sector, from Chinese private sector, from Vietnam, from Korea, everybody, you name it. Sorry to name some countries. So if we have assets who are helping countries take a little bit better care of their fishery stocks, that's a fantastic thing for their livelihoods. 1 in 3, our estimates, of the world's tuna is an illegal tuna today. And the loss coming to the Pacific from that alone is probably $500 million a year. That is many multiples of ODA into the Pacific. Second is that Pacific is also losing its tuna as a consequence of climate change. And guess who are the beneficiaries of that? Because tuna migrates to cooler waters who are becoming warmer now, right? So, and they go in a big cycle across many countries in the Pacific. But as the waters heat up, they move to what were former cooler waters, which are becoming water. So they warmer, and so they're moving out of many of the EEZs of Pacific Islands. Combined, both illegal fisheries and the loss of tuna as a consequence of climate change, global warming, is about twice the amount of total ODA and concessionary loan coming into the Pacific. So that single strategic investment on Coast Guard cooperation or naval cooperation with the Pacific, it has many multiples of positive outcomes for both sides. And certainly many more times for the Pacific. Second is that these are small island states, and part of this stability equation always is when people think about stability, probably better think about instability first. What does an unstable state look like? Probably Somalia comes to your mind, and these type of conflict-affected countries over decades, right? But at some point, countries begin to become fragile and then eventually conflict-affected and unstable. And part of the start of that journey has to do with when the economies begin to fall apart. And small states cannot take repeated climate shocks. They are like war. They're essentially the same impact on societies as war does. Schools are destroyed, infrastructure are destroyed, people die, livelihoods are destroyed, etc. And so over time, if this continues, then they become unstable as well. So stepping up, my number 2, stepping up and delivering much faster on the development side, on the climate and development side, I think would be my second big ask of the US system. And the third is getting Pacific small states much more closely integrated with the U.S. trading system, so that the small products, and Major General has spoken about that, have easy access into U.S. As a consequence, livelihoods are strengthened, and U.S. private sector gets more interested in the Pacific, which are beautiful places to invest in, which are tremendous tourism potential, tremendous potential around the blue economy, and absolutely no reason why U.S. investment private sector should not be able to take a much closer look at the enormous potential of the small island states.
Thank you both for those remarks. I'd never thought of climate shocks as being like war. That is a very, I'm going to spend some time thinking about that, but that is a very profound analogy and comment, if I do say so myself. Indu, you unmuted. Did you have anything to ask? I have a question in the chat, but I'll let you go first.
I have a question to Major General Knapp that what else the National Guard do other than the military training program? Because recently we have seen that in the program of Indo-PACOM, they have started some yeah, we know that there is a disaster relief awareness programs and to helping in the disaster relief situation. But recently, I saw some pictures on the Indo-PACOM website that they, and there was a news too. So they have started the military health exchange programs, kind of things that they're putting the camps, collaborating with the hospitals, and then they are providing their services. So just curious that people to people connect ties. What's the role of NSG that you are leading?
Great question. And it's one of the things I hadn't touched on yet, but I'm glad that we're getting to it. And that's really our second line of effort after, we talk about defense professionalization and force management, but our second is humanitarian assistance, disaster response, environmental security, and public health. And so those are our big topics for us. In fact, the majority of the exchanges that we've had with PNG so far, more than half have been all medical exchanges. So we've had their doctors, medics, a number of their medical professionals. Actually, we've hosted them here in Wisconsin. And we've also had our medical professionals have gone to Papua New Guinea to work on medical exchanges. In addition to that, I am fortunate enough that I oversee emergency management here in the state of Wisconsin. And so on our last exchange, we took the head of emergency management here in Wisconsin, and they talked about emergency mitigation and the things that you can do to prepare left of an actual emergency like the cyclone in Vanuatu that the ambassador mentioned. And so while our partnership is young, these are definitely goals of ours. And we've gotten, there was a disaster preparedness summit in Papua New Guinea where I did send one of my military disaster preparedness and response planners and one of my civilian folks as well, so that they could get both perspectives, not just on the military side, but also on the civilian side, because it definitely takes a partnership between the two in order to do both in terms of disaster preparedness and public health. And then the third thing in terms of exchanges, we've had a pretty robust legal exchange as well, where I've got a number of lawyers from Wisconsin that have gone to Papua New Guinea for legal exchanges, talking both about their military law and structure, as well as they've gotten into, not as much, but they've also gotten into some of the civil law exchanges between the two, between Papua New Guinea and Wisconsin. So great question, great topic, and it really is one of our top priorities in terms of cooperating with Papua New Guinea.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a fantastic, maintaining the people-to-people tie and expanding apart from the military. That's very important. Mm-hmm. Chris, you want to take the question from the chat?
Sounds good. It zeroes in on Papua New Guinea. Of course, this is a region that it's a top of mind issue in many parts of the region, particularly the Solomon Islands. What kind of influence or attempts of influence by the Chinese have you all seen in Papua New Guinea? Is it strictly economic, or are they extending military offers or other possible partnerships, things of that nature? So I'll throw that to either or both of you, whoever wants to take it.
So Ambassador, I'll start off, and then you can back clean up for me if fill in all the spots that I missed, which I'm sure will be a number of them. But yes, so we are definitely seeing a lot of involvement from China in Papua New Guinea in both the commercial and the military space. And so the hard part is, and not a lot of people, well, I think everyone on this panel understands, but not everyone out there understands that there really isn't the division between your private and public sector in China like there is in the United States. So everything all is tied back to the government in China. So there's very few things that happen in terms of international investment that aren't a direct result of a government initiative. And so the Chinese have done that. They have offered significant infrastructure improvements in the ports of Papua New Guinea, the airports, and they are much like they have done in other places. In fact, probably the best example is the Solomon Islands. There's been a lot of talk about the agreement signed in the Solomon Islands between China and that government recently, and that definitely was I would say an eye opener for us in the region as to the ability of China to get these countries to sign the agreements. Are we competing? Yes, but at the same time, the countries that we're talking about, the countries in the area, as we mentioned, they need assistance. They need outside assistance in order to help them develop and grow their economies. And so, while China is providing certain things to some of these countries, we also want to be there and provide expertise and an investment in these countries. China, to specifically get back to the question, China has provided military equipment to the Papua New Guinea Defense Force. One of the things that we have seen China around the world when they do provide defense equipment is they provide the equipment. It's a shiny thing, whether it's a Chinese version of a Humvee or a rifle or whatever it might be, just using generic examples. But there isn't any maintenance parts or the upkeep of these items for the long term. So it's like a one-time gift. And then the countries, to include Papua New Guinea, who have this equipment, have a very hard time getting parts, equipment, and training to utilize those. So so if you were to visit some of the military bases in Papua New Guinea, you may see some Chinese equipment parked off on the side with weeds growing up around it because it just is not it's not usable after the initial term. So when we go in, we definitely try to provide that entire logistics capacity. And what we do in the Wisconsin National Guard, we have a great maintenance capacity. We have engineering capacity. And what we would like to do is to not provide just a gift, but to provide the capability to maintain and sustain those any items or any equipment that we would take into the country.
Ambassador, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. Thanks. I don't have much to add on the military side. I simply don't have oversight of that side, and also as a trained diplomat, I like to keep out of issues of sovereign matters of other countries. My way of responding to this is twofold. First is that look at what Pacific Islands want to do. And the first is that Pacific Islands have voice, and this is their region, and these are independent, sovereign countries. Colonialism is not too far in their past. They've become independent in my lifetime. Fiji became independent in my lifetime, about 2/3 of my life, and many of the countries have been independent, about 3 decades back. So sovereignty really matters to them in a way that it doesn't matter. You take it in US for granted. You take it in India for granted because you have much longer experiences. So that's pretty important. And these are states that are trying to, and the mark of sovereignty, in my experience at the UN, was, the strength of your voice is how independent you are as a country, how economically independent. If you are economically independent, you have greater voice in the international system. If you are too dependent on one or two economies for trade, for aid and other things, your sovereignty, on the margins get compromised. You can't speak with the same openness as you'd want to. So these are countries who are really trying to have stable and prosperous economies, and they're trying to do everything they can. And some of them also try to take shortcuts in the process because it matters to them. And sovereignty matters to small states in ways I can't describe. It is very, very different from the way in which it matters to large states. Very, very different. And there's an emotive side to it as well. So out of choice almost that most of the Pacific Island countries will be looking to both US and China for the economic development opportunities. The thing before us is that when countries choose development pathways and investment and in infrastructure, investments in agriculture and so on, that the choices they make are the right ones. And this is difficult. This does not come easy. A road needs to be built. You can go to World Bank and try to get it financed. You can go to Australia and US and the partners and try to get some finances together. You can go to Asian Development Bank. You can go to China, and there are many options. Where they go to matters. So Pacific is saying this thing, that often many of these international development resources that are available to them, that it's just so hard for them to access it. As a consequence, there are some countries who benefit out of the difficult access that small island states have. All the rules of the international financial development system were made with large countries in mind, right? They were made in post-war period, in 1940s, 50s, World Bank, IMF, or these things were being created. None of us were free. They were made with Indonesia in mind, with India in mind, with China in mind. All the rules are kind of jigged in favor of large economies. And so it's getting growingly frustrating for small states over time, year in, year out, decade in, decade out, to try to access these funds. So we have to make it easy for them. And one part of my always in my sort of straight talk to US and the developed partners of the Pacific is, please, think about what small states are. Think about Tuvalu, country of 20, 30,000 people trying to access resources in this very complicated machineries. And why do you make it so hard for them? And so you almost by default make it easy for them to seek easy access to finance and development resources. So that is probably how I'd like to respond to this question. And so if you see increased infrastructure investment in the Pacific that is funded through China, probably part of it is driven by just how difficult it is for small states to be accessing the resources that should be available to them, that is available to them, but the process and procedures are just so hard for them. And US sits on the board, on the boards and all of these development agencies. US and the partners of the Blue Pacific have a big voice, so I hope they can make better use of their voice to improve the systems on this.
I appreciate those remarks from both of you. As we're closing in on our hour here, as we start to bring it home, I just would ask both of you, is there anything we haven't brought up in this survey of this important region that we should bring up, or any kind of concluding remarks that you might have for our audience and for our viewers as we begin to wrap it up?
Well, Chris, I think I've gotten to touch on most of the topics, but boy, I have to start off by saying I've learned a lot. I took a lot of notes, but I think the ambassador summed up the state partnership program and the goals and aims of it is that it's that personal connection, it's that long-term connection. I know that there are leaders in Papua New Guinea that we frequently text message each other, and when something happens there, something happens here, we're personally connected. It's not just that once a year meeting. And as being one of the senior leaders my time in this role is limited, but what I'm most excited about are getting my young soldiers and airmen and my young civilian employees over to Papua New Guinea and getting their young folks over here so that they can develop relationships over decades, because that is what is really going to create that personal relationship, which is going to see and support and value the sovereignty that the ambassador mentioned, because that is huge, and it's extremely important for as important to their countries as it is to ours, and we do value that. And the other note that I took, which I want to key in on, that I'm going to take away and use in the future from the ambassador is, which I really love, is let's try to collaborate instead of compete in the Pacific, because I think it is a team sport. And when we talk about allies and partners, that's really what it's all about. The more we can collaborate and all move toward common goals, the better off everyone will be, not just in the Pacific, but throughout the entire world. So that's how I'll conclude, and definitely open for more questions, and I'll pass it over to the ambassador for your professional closing.
No, that's, I think that was excellent. I don't know what I can add to that. My couple of closing remarks is one, that the trend lines on U.S. and the Pacific are solid and very positive, and I really like, Major General, the way you frame it. There are no short-term fixes to the Pacific Island development challenges. I wish there were, but they aren't. They almost by necessity require long-term engagements and long-term support, and that perspective of kind of intergenerational. I hope it's not intergenerational, but decades-long thinking and perspective is very important, and I wish you all the best in that effort. Second is that I hope I have tried to convey that if everyone can begin to think about the Pacific slightly differently. It didn't probably matter to people before. It matters to everybody now in ways that it didn't before. Every second or third breath that we take as a human being probably comes from the Pacific Ocean. And whether you are in Beijing or Washington, we have a shared stake, therefore, in that this part of the planet is able to continue to provide that service, and that the ocean is not deoxygenated, and that acidification and global warming do not kill it, and its service that it provides to us as human beings and to our children and grandchildren, I hope. And the third, and I know that the second one is very abstract, people don't connect to it, but I do, every opportunity I get, remind people that the third breath that we take as a human being comes from the Pacific Ocean, and protect that. It's the third is my concluding remark is that probably outside of the Pacific, most people's prosperity also for many, many decades in the future, it probably depends on stability of the whole of the Pacific. This is the arteries and the highways through which trade and goods and services will move in ways that the Atlantic trade of Europe and US of the past centuries, the next century, prosperity, wealth, and our livelihoods will be dependent on stability across the Blue Pacific, the arteries and the highways of global trade in the next century. And so it is in everyone's interest, whether in Beijing or DC or Wisconsin, Papua New Guinea, that there's order and stability across the high seas. And for the Pacific, rules really matter. That really matter. For small states, rules really matter. For large states, US, you have Navy, you have assets, you have satellites, spy ships, missiles, nuclear warheads. Pacific Island is the only warheads we have are international law, and so rules matter. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And that is the perfect note to end on. Ambassador Prasad, General Knapp, very much appreciate you joining us and that outstanding perspective and the questions from the audience and from you too, Indu. I'll turn it back to you if you have any last kind of formally conclude the panel and bring us off.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Major General Knapp and Ambassador Prasad, for your time and for your expertise and experience to this topic. And we really feel positive to move forward with your expertise in our next seminars and conferences in our next program at the consortium. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good morning or good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, and I'll say good day to everybody. Welcome to the Consortium for Indo-Pacific Researchers 2023 conference, the Alliances and Partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, Elevating Strategies and Interests. I am Captain Brennan Donnelly. I am an officer with the United States Air Force, and I am joined by many people on this panel. First off, the Director for the Consortium for Indo-Pacific Researchers, Dr. Andrew Saxena. Chris Kolakowski, the director of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum in Madison, and a senior fellow for the military history team in the consortium. Our presenters, Won Jindong from the Asia Pacific University in Japan, Rania Rihana from Indonesia, Aditya Galasasi from New Mexico University, Shahir Ahmed from the National Defense University in Pakistan, and Behesti Monfared from the American International University in Bangladesh.